When I was in New York several years ago, after the financial crisis, 4 or 5 years ago, I was on Wall Street for a very long time. That's when the meme of the smart cities started. I think it was really because of IBM's marketing team thought it was a good way to sell more products and systems. And they kind of got ahead of themselves. And this whole idea of systems, there's a lot of conversation about that, achieving efficiency of public services, but also eventually about livability and sustainability. And for Singapore now, a lot of people pointed to Singapore as a quintessential example of the smart city. Singapore now has been talking about the smart nation. And in that way, I think it's much more aligned with what my view is of a smart city. It's a place where you foster productivity, creativity, and inclusivity. I think these are really important parts of a people-centered city. When I went to some of the cities like Songdo, I almost used to always ask them, there were these spanking new buildings, but there were no people. There was often never any conversation about privacy and never any talk of poverty as well. All things are 3 Ps that really matter to me. And today I'm here to talk about the 4th P, which is play. So I grew up in Pakistan. Why does this matter? It matters because in the developing world, we see people migrating to cities every single day. And this is important because it reminds us why people migrate. People migrate for social and economic mobility, not for technology, not because they can plug into their health system more easily, or that they can have sensors everywhere. This all does not occur to them. What they care about is that there is an opportunity for them to earn more, to have a higher quality of life, and a future for their children that is better than they have. And this is now becoming important even for people like us who live in cities that are quote unquote developed. Because just like those people in villages feared for their jobs, I think a lot of people in cities fear for their jobs as well. This is a report that was, it's based on a study at Oxford University, and it's quoted a lot of times. I haven't really gone into the statistics or the analysis of it very deeply, but this is from The Economist, and it basically says that 47% of jobs will be automated. This is a concern for Singapore as well, which relies so heavily on human capital and not its natural resources. In fact, DPM, the Deputy Prime Minister, who used to be the finance minister also, actually said, what if jobs and skills have an expiration date? So you're in a city, now you've made it. Either you were born in a city if you're Singaporean, or if you're from India or Pakistan or some other place, now you've moved to a city, now you've got the job, but now there's no guarantee that the job you have will still exist. So if you're a lawyer, you don't know if a machine will actually be able to do precedence research. If you're a doctor, you're not sure if there'll be an assistant nurse that's actually a robot. So these are some things that really matter to people. In Singapore, we kind of have an approach that the government has put forward. I was on the Ministry of Education's committee last year, and that committee was called the Aspire Committee. I was with Minister Indrani Raja, and we were thinking about how to pivot the higher education in this country to make it more aligned with the innovations that are happening in industry. And the key to that was to have closer links between industry and education. So Skills Future, for anybody who's been reading the news recently, is really a concerted effort by Singapore and all the educational institutions in Singapore to create an environment where students can more closely work with industry and experiment and take part in the innovations that are happening in industry. So what do? I have a new startup called the Keys Academy. And what we do is we provide an enrichment hub for students who want to look beyond grades and actually want to have the skills that will be still marketable and keep them employable in an era of automation. I think we're in a real danger in Asia. And I don't know how many of you have studied in Asia. I studied in Asia. And we have often equated rigor with grades, assessment, memorization, doing very well in our classes. That now we know is not really rigor. So people who come first in their PSLE exams, or who do very well in O-levels and A-levels exams, that's what we consider rigor. So a lot of parents feel very nervous about this. They realize, there's something wrong here. The world is changing. These are not going to be characteristics that are going to be rewarded in the future. So I'll just throw my kids in after-school activities that are mostly play. And in play, they just think it's fun. Fun, 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 fun. And I think because in Asia we got rigor wrong, we're about to swing the other extreme and get play wrong as well. Why is that? Well, rigor is really understanding concepts that are complex and ambiguous, contentious, and it's really deep conceptual understanding of a particular topic and the ability to take that knowledge and apply it to new contexts. Whereas play is making sense of the world through interaction and the freedom to experiment and the permission to fail. I think for me, it's more freedom than fun. Right? The freedom to do what you want, the freedom to push boundaries, the freedom to make rules and break rules, that's play. And when we think of an education system and a systematic way to produce the labor force of the future in Singapore, or how to develop our human capital, we need to think about rigor and play and the intersection of rigor and play, keeping these two definitions in mind. John Seeley Brown has been thinking about what makes someone successful in the 21st century. And he has this idea that traditionally we've given a lot of importance to this idea of Homo sapiens, man who knows. In fact, that's usually how we refer to ourselves as a species. But he also says there's Homo faber, man who makes. And so the 21st century learner, or someone who would be successful in the workplace of the future, would be somebody who embodies the characteristics of Homo sapiens and Homo faber, and then he adds onto it Homo ludens, man who plays. And he talks about an education system that gives equal weight to all three of these things. So it gives you a space where you can do all three. And a lot of you, in fact, all of you are adults. I'm sure many of you are not even married or have children, and you may consider, why am I talking to you about this? Well, it matters because we live in an environment and an era of lifelong learning. So even as all of you go out and think about what you need to do next for your next career, your next job, this is one way of thinking about how you should pivot your lifelong learning and education. So where are these spaces? You can go to many spaces. There are more and more hackathons, maker spaces. This is one maker that William Hui started in the National Design Center. You can book a space and you can go with the kids, or you can go on your own with parent and children and prototype different and interesting projects. There's hackathons that IDA, Jacqueline was here earlier. She's been putting together quite a bit. I think these are all really valuable spaces. But I am a believer in going directly, immersing yourself in the marketplace. So what does that mean? It's having skills through something that I call is an externship. Now, an externship I would define as a learning experience that teaches secondary school students the skills and the opportunity to solve a problem faced by a company in their field of interest. Usually when we look at high school students, here you would call them Sec 4 to JC 2, you don't get any exposure to companies. They're trying to change that now. This applied learning pedagogy is actually now being rolled out by the Ministry of Education. And people are obsessed with this idea of internships, interning, being inside a particular company where nobody gives you any importance. Nobody knows what to do with interns. Have you ever had interns? It's kind of difficult to manage them. Most of the time you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with them? And the interns usually come out of the experience and they say, wow, I learned something. I definitely don't want to work in that industry. All of them say that. And so it's terrible. It's lose-lose for both the company and the student, not to mention for the parent who's been pinning their hopes on it. So an externship came to me as I went from company to company, and I said, look, you've got to give these kids a chance. They may be 15, they may be 16, but they're really smart. And they said, look, we don't know how to do this. We don't know how to manage them. And I said, well, you know what? I can broker this relationship between schools and industry. And so we created this startup. It's called The Keys. And it's in Odeon Towers on Northbridge Road. And what we do is we provide a space where companies come in and give innovation challenges. Not stupid, here, photocopy this, get me coffee, don't waste my time. But this is a real challenge that I'm facing, and I would like to give it to students. And then students sit in what is a kind of a co-working space in our little startup, and they solve those challenges. We tell them, we scaffold it a little bit, we tell them some skills to learn, and then they go out and they meet the company, but they are housed. So they're externs, they're external to the company. But it's kind of a win-win, because the company gets to see their future consumers, gets fresh talent to think about creative problems, and the students get a real experience, at the end of which they present to someone in senior management. So otherwise, you go for an internship, you can see the senior management, they're kind of, walking down the corridors all day long, but you barely get a chance to talk to them because, you probably don't have something useful to say. But here, companies have agreed to give them that time. And the companies themselves only have to spend about 6 hours during this couple of weeks externship with the students in terms of managing them. So what happens? You give the company, we go to a company, we devise an innovation challenge, we bring it back, the students tackle the problem, and they present it to the corporate partner, and then there's a learning pathway. You go from simpler problems to more difficult problems. In Singapore, if you're under 18, you can't even sign a non-disclosure agreement. That's a problem if you want to have students working on something mildly even secretive. So we come in, we broker it, we make it and we parse it and we ring fence it in a way that students can take on these challenges. So who are some of our partners? We have a lot of them, and there are 3 types of partners that we have. But we have Jungle Ventures that we're signing on as a partner. Jungle Ventures does a lot of investments in startups. They've had a lot of successful exits like ZipDial in India, and they also recently had Ratan Tata join them on their advisory board. We have Autodesk. Autodesk has 3 things. They work with Lucasfilms. They do virtual 3D museums, and they also do smart city networks and numerous other things. They've given us a number of challenges that they're working on. Bloomberg is a media company. It wants to understand how to reach the millennials and the younger generation. All of these are challenges. ActionX is an SME. SMEs are the best for us because they need the manpower. And so ActionX, I don't know how many of you have heard of zombie runs. So basically, you run and these actors dressed up as zombies run after you. And incredibly popular. 20,000 people showed up for this in Shanghai 2 months ago, 10,000 in some other city. So this guy, he's ex-Singapore military, he franchised ActionX for Asia. And he's growing in leaps and bounds. And one of the things he wants to do is have some wearable tech so that when you're running, people want to know their heart rate, they want to know if their friends are nearby, they want to know how their perspiration is. So he has 8 students from SUTD working on this app, and then one of our students is helping think of the user experience design. So that's a challenge. And then Upcom. Upcom lays the internet cables in HDBs, amongst other places. So what's the problem? What's the most common problem operations companies like this face? Well, migrant labor, or the lack thereof. And so this is the problem that they have. They're like, what are we going to do? So the students are going to talk about the law, they're going to think about it, they're going to come up with operations optimization. There are some boundaries under which they work, but in a way, they're completely free to come up with creative solutions. I like this, because what happens is, real life is unpredictable. It's constantly changing. So it puts a certain amount of pressure on them, but it takes them away from being an employee where you're completely limited in your creativity. And entrepreneurial learning, there should be a pathway to it, right? It's not that you keep working on the same problems. That's another reason why we exist, because we don't take any money from the companies. We are only interested in students and increasing their skills and giving them exposure. So this is a string of salons called Hairy Culture. It hasn't been doing very well. I think its name might have something to do with that. But I don't know. Anyway, they haven't changed the name, but they've asked us to help them. They haven't been doing very well. Their marketing is bad. They need some consumer and interesting kind of service innovation. And so some of our students are working on this. Talked about Bloomberg. Other partners we're in talks with are Google, Uber, Airbnb, Garena, the mobile app company, which is considered a big unicorn in Singapore. So these are some of our students. These are from United World College. They were just here this week, so I took the most recent batch. The guy in the glasses is our mentor, so that's kind of our externship supervisor. This person sits in the co-working space and guides them as needed a little bit. And then Kevin Sullivan is a director at IEN Consultants. IEN Consultants look at sustainable design of buildings, but also at sustainable food supply chains. So the girls spend a lot of time thinking of food supply chains and looking at wastage and going out there and doing research with him, without him, and then coming back in our offices and finally gave him a presentation. And he said they didn't solve it. And this was important because we never say you should solve the challenge. You tackle the challenge. There is no solution always. It's not an equation. It's not an exam. Part of playing, as I said, is the permission to tinker and the permission to fail and the freedom to experiment. Finally, a lot of people ask me, well, what about those kids who just want to build their own thing? And there's no problem with that. Although having some experience being an entrepreneur myself, I think it's useful to work in other entrepreneurial ventures that other people are running and learning from them. But we have level 3 when you kind of can identify your problem. And it's really important. This is not age specific, and it's only skill specific. If you prove that you've had ideas that are good, you can form an international team, and our partner is Conrad Innovation Challenge. Pete Conrad, the third man on the moon, he unfortunately passed away in a motorcycle accident, and his wife set up the Conrad Innovation Challenge. It's a business technology challenge, and people from all over the world participate in this, including Tel Aviv and our partner, Milken Community High School. And this is one of the ones that they did. The next one, we'll be doing it together with them. So again, giving them access to international teams, both for competitive advantage, but also to understand how to have cross-collaboration and cultural collaboration skills. So that was a little bit about skills and the importance of skills. As I said, for me, a smart nation is about smart citizens, those who have the right skills, but it's also about inclusion. And that brings me to the second venture that I've started in Singapore. It's a nonprofit, and it's called 21C Girls. That's 21st Century Girls. And our mission is to empower girls and women with technology, because we believe that any kind of discrimination, gender, race, age, sexuality, it all leads to less diversity, less innovation. We've been working with, again, United World College Foundation, and with Google, we have an introduction to coding class that is taken by 250 girls in Crescent Girls High School. A number of other schools are also going to be joining this. And the key here was introducing the girls in terms of applied learning and pedagogy. So if they're learning about conditionals or loops, which are basic computational thinking concepts, we put it in context of drones and cloud. All the time, we try to give them that exposure so that they won't pick up the newspaper. They can actually understand what is happening in the world in terms of industrial innovation. The other thing that I believe in, again, bringing me back to the fact that I'm originally from a developing country. So I grew up in Pakistan, I was Pakistani. I went to America, spent most of my life there, became American, and recently I became Singaporean because I just moved here 3 years ago. So that journey has helped me think through living in 3 very different places, has affected the way I think about education. In Pakistan, I remember I was working with women in microfinance and villages. I've always been interested in women's rights. And I was so impressed by the way, once they had some money, their understanding of everything from business, cash flows, interest rates, profit and loss, they didn't call it by those names, but they clearly understood it. They were very smart. And so whenever we have programs at 21C Girls at cultural associations like Sinda and Mandaki, where, as you can see, we teach the kids robotics, we have another room where we have the moms. Because otherwise the moms come and they sit outside and they're just twiddling their thumbs. So we just call them into the room and we said, why don't you get onto code.org and let me tell you a little bit about why your children need computer skills. And it's not that hard and it's kind of interesting. And a lot of moms, they're just, they're actually there and they're trying hard and they'll work in pairs. And afterwards they say, this is not that hard, I can do that with my son or my daughter. So women have a huge role to play in education and the importance of creativity and understanding these things. The worst thing that you can do to parents is dismiss them, that they don't know what they're talking about, be patronizing to them. No matter what economic class they come from, parents always do want the best for their child and they pick up very quickly if you explain things to them well. That is very, very important to me. And Sinda and Mandaki are, as you know, they're two cultural associations that are doing a lot for their communities. Finally, something else that matters to me a lot, which is being balanced about technology. And so this is from our website. One of the teachers, my colleagues at the Keys Academy, put together an ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemmas matter a lot. They especially matter when you care about inclusion, when you care about diversity. And we don't introduce children to them very early on, certainly not in context of technology, and we should, because it not only makes them thoughtful about how they should use technology, it also makes them feel empowered relative to technology because it gives them a choice. It very subtly, again and again, reinforces the importance of design and algorithms and the fact that they make choices every time they do that. So we have started introducing this in our classes. And again, a smart nation, a smart city, a playful city, you can call it anything you want. The important thing is that inclusion matters, and more than that, ethics matter. No matter how you use technology, it's always a double-edged sword. So thank you very much for listening to my thoughts on education and play in the Smart Nation. And I look forward to hearing from you on questions regarding education. Thank you.